So my name is Amanda. I don't know, can everybody say their names, please? Katie and Taylor.
Yes, I'm Katie.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Autumn.
And we're presenting on a participatory action research project that we undertook over the last year. And our presentation is called Developing and Enacting Critical Intercultural Praxis through Participatory Action Research. So for today, whoopsies, there we go. All right. My fancy transitions. For today, we're gonna start by doing a little bit of mindfulness work to kind of center ourselves in the discussions that we'll be having for today. After that, we'll get into what exactly is participatory action research and what was our project. But we'll spend the bulk of today's class, I'm such a teacher, today's presentation, kind of walking through our experiences with this, from getting started with community building, doing some reconnaissance within our community, taking action as a community, and then kind of our lingering thoughts on PAR. So that's sort of the agenda today, but we're going to start with some mindfulness. So I'm going to pass you over to Taylor to take it away.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for joining us, everybody. So we're just going to start off with mindfulness. If you want, you can. Sorry, Amanda, do you hear that? Oh, never mind. Sorry, I thought I heard some echoing. Is it okay now?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
That's fine.
All right, okay. Let's all take a moment and close our eyes and listen to the sound of our breath. Listen to the sound of the air entering and leaving your lungs with each inhale and exhale. Notice the way your breath feels leaving your nose between your lips. Let's stay here for a few more breaths, just observing the way your lungs expand and then contract with each new breath. Now that we have found some balance within our breath, I want you to think of a time you felt connected or included. What did it feel like to experience connection? Were you alone? Maybe with others? What sensations, thoughts, or emotions came with the feeling of connection? Let's return to the breath again. Observe your breath entering and leaving your body. Any thoughts that rise to the surface, allow them to pass through like a cloud in the sky. Now I want you to think about what makes you feel most comfortable at school or at your workplace. Is there a person who helps you feel comfortable? Is there an activity that brings you comfort there? Let's once again return to the breath. Noticing the rise and fall of the chest with each breath. Let's stay here for a couple more breaths. When you're ready, you can start by bringing your attention to your fingers and your toes. Start by lifting them or wiggling them slowly, bringing some movement back to your body. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes and bring yourself back to the workshop. Thank you all for being present and thoughtful for this activity. Oh, you muted, Amanda.
I was absorbed in my mindfulness.
Good.
Thank you so much for that, Taylor.
No worries.
So we wanted to start with mindfulness to kind of center ourselves, because we're asking you to think about education and think about the world a little differently than how it is. So I think it's important to be aware of ourselves and our bodies and our spaces. We wanted to start out by asking you your familiarity and understanding about participatory action research. Now, everybody has been made a panelist, so you can unmute yourselves and share out verbally, orally, or you can use the chat function to just drop maybe one thing you might know about participatory action research, or one thing that you've heard about it, or maybe one question you have. So if everybody can drop something into the chat, or if you know nothing, that's totally okay. That's why we're here, right? So you can use the chat function to share what you know, or you can say something orally. So we'll leave this space open for a couple minutes for this. I can't see anybody, so let's see here. And get some chat. Any thoughts? What you know? Thank you for sharing, Victoria. Yeah, that collaboration, very important. Participatory, definitely, Carla. It's a big factor here, right? In solving a real problem, right? Other thoughts? Things you know?
I think that was pretty good.
Yeah. Makes our job easy today. All right. Let me go ahead and move on to our next screen, where I'll share kind of my thoughts about the participatory action research here. So for us, we all know that in general, experiencing sort of anything in the world means that we are participants in that experience. And in effect, we're both experiencing and impacting whatever that is. And oftentimes in education, we kind of think of classroom spaces somewhat as these little cocoons or safe havens from the outside world. Teachers want to support and shelter their students. And often this manifests as teachers trying to be neutral in these spaces where the outside world can really remain outside. But the reality is that all of us, both teachers and learners and also admins and everyone else in education, is really carrying into the world, into our classrooms, our experiences in the world, right? And no matter how hard we believe classroom spaces can be these neutral environments, they simply aren't, right? However, even though we have our own experiences that we're bringing into the classroom, our school system is very rigid in its top-down treatment of experience, and in particular, the dissemination of knowledge. But we know that learners enter our classrooms with myriad funds of knowledge and really vast community cultural wealth. And even when we have these quote unquote student-centered schooling approaches, generally speaking, the standards that we're expected to be accountable to and the curricula, basically all of the knowledge that's in our school spaces that we claim as being essential to learning is rarely given birth from the students, the families, and the communities we serve. And so participatory action research is an approach that really demands the opposite. PAR in a way, well, actually PAR is a systematic approach to personal and organizational and structural transformation, and an intentionally and transparently political endeavor that places human self-determination, the development of critical consciousness, and positive social change as central to experience, and central to education.
Amanda, did you see the question in the chat?
No.
Okay, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
Okay. There was a question of, is there a connection here with Freire? I think that's right. Freire's
Yes,
participatory
Freire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Freire.
So Freire's notion of dialogic education, where we're trying to create dialogue within ourselves, dialogue between ourselves, and dialogue with the world, where the students have the power to create knowledge, and therefore create change, is a very fundamental element of participatory action research. There's a lot of traditions that PAR comes out of, but a lot of the work that Freire did is looking at participatory education, essentially. Yeah, excellent question for sure. Right, so PAR is really an approach that centers on community, right? And it centers on the ability of community members to identify an issue of inequity and critically reflect on issues of injustice within their community that they themselves define, right? And so the power of PAR is really in that community piece. The community has the knowledge and the skills and the ability to address these issues in ways that are locally responsive, right? So PAR highlights that collaborative knowledge production in order to craft sort of these critical interpretations and readings of the world around us. So at its core, PAR is deeply relational. It's all about the relations, right? And it's a relational approach to knowledge creation and a relational approach to social change. In teaching, we view PAR as a potential powerful pedagogy in driving equity in both our classrooms and educational spaces, and then beyond those, right? A lot of the scholars that work with PAR call it sort of this practice changing practice, because it really creates conditions for teachers to better understand and develop their praxis from within communities, rather than from a sort of unidirectional top-down enactment of curriculum and knowledge, right? And because it's grounded in relationships, PAR really encourages all of us participants our intercultural communication, because we are confronted with our intercultural relationships within our communities, right? So PAR reframes our consciousness in ways that become responsive at the local level. It really demands an understanding of cultural hybridity and identity construction. So essentially, PAR is asking us to go through a process of research in order to enact some kind of change, right? So from identifying and critically reflecting on an issue, researching that issue, devising plans of action in order to confront that issue, actually enacting those action plans, and then reflecting on and assessing these actions, and doing this sort of in a cyclical process, right? And the goal, again, is change. And there are sort of three types of change that we can talk about. One being the development of critical consciousness of the participants as co-researchers. One being improvement in something, but that improvement is defined by the community. And lastly, the possibility for transforming fundamental societal structures and relationships. So that's kind of what we're getting at with PAR, and we're going to be focusing on our experiences and what we learned along the way of doing a PAR project during our course on intercultural communication and English language teaching. And this was the course that really targeted pre-service teachers' dispositions towards dismantling inequity in English language education. And with that, I'm going to send it over to Katie, who's going to tell us a little bit more about our particular PAR project.
All right. So thank you, Amanda. One of the first things that you should probably know about our PAR project as we did it is that there was some hesitation within the classroom. We were not immediately sold on it. It wasn't exactly an easy process getting started. But once we were sold, we dove straight in. There were a lot of ideas kind of swimming around in our heads, and many people had lots of topics that they were really passionate about and wanted to do this research. But we kind of had to narrow it down a little bit. So we split into small groups, and each person came with a topic and a little bit of research already done. And we pitched our ideas to the small groups and decided within that group on one topic. And then the small groups would pitch that to the whole class. And there were some really great ideas throughout our classroom. We had things like more accessible grocery stores at the university and like raising campus minimum wage. But we all kind of agreed that the one thing that we all had in common with something that we were really passionate about was the school to prison pipeline. So that's what we chose to research. But from there, we had to figure out how to like enact our change. And we were grappling with this question, what could we do as a group to actually impact the world around us? And this concept is big and at first kind of inaccessible. But we persisted, and there were tons of ideas on how to do this, like new branches of grassroots groups and organizing marches and rallies. We had tons of things floating around. But we all had kind of wildly different ideas on how to start. So we decided that the best way to go about enacting change would be to split into action pathway groups. Each pathway group would focus on sort of one area of change, and they would collaborate with each other to create some sort of a final product. And after we did some more planning, we decided that our pathway groups should include expert outreach, a teacher resource guide, contacting legislators, and a social media campaign. Expert outreach would connect with local leaders and compile their recommended resources for educators. The teacher resource guide provided statistics about the pipeline and methods to disrupt the pipeline in the classroom. The group that contacted legislators would try to get in contact with lawmakers and encourage them to draft laws that would halt the pipeline. And finally, the social media campaign would spread awareness to those who didn't know about the pipeline or its effects specifically on Black and Brown students. While each group was kind of working independently on our particular pathway, there was still a lot of collaboration within groups. We realized that we could use each other's findings to help support our classmates, our projects, and our change as a whole. So we shared our products, our findings, and our processes with each other, and we were pitching ideas and getting input from each other as we were working through. And as we progressed through the months, it became clear to many of us that the work we were doing with PAR and with our pathway groups was changing the way we thought about our future classrooms, our future students, and ourselves. So towards the end of the semester, we shared these final products with each other and discussed how grateful we were to have this project under our belts, because none of us had ever done anything like this before. And it was, like Amanda referenced, a changing practice. All of a sudden, our ideas for how to run a classroom equitably had been completely changed. We wanted to do PAR with our future students, and we wanted to continue on with this. So that's when Amanda offered us the opportunity to continue on with the project and share our experiences here.
All right, so I wanted to talk about how we got started with PAR. So we started the semester by trying to build a classroom community, and I'm a biology major, so most of my classes are about the material we're learning, and that's it. And we don't take the time to build a classroom community. But here we took 2 class periods to get to know the people who we'd be working with and learning from. And I wasn't sure about that at first, but it ended up being very useful. And we also talked about creating a brave space versus a safe space. So we worked to respect our classmates in their opinions and acknowledge when our dialogue had affected someone's well-being. And we also work to call our classmates in, not call them out, because we all make mistakes and we can learn from them. And I really liked getting to know my classmates, and that also helped me after we went online during the semester because of COVID. And I felt that my classmates supported me, and I hope that I supported them too. And I was often challenged by what we were learning because it really made me think about my position in the world. And so I had to work through some of that material, and my classmates were there to discuss it with me. So I think that helped me to get more from the class and from PAR after we got started with it. And going through that process of building a classroom community helped me to trust my classmates, so that when we did get into the PAR project and so many of the decisions were up to us, this helped us to take more risks, and it made me more confident in myself because I knew when it did get challenging, my classmates would be there to help me understand. And also knowing my classmates made me work harder on PAR when, Amanda wasn't there to tell us what to do, because I knew how hard they were working and I didn't want to let them down, and I didn't want to let myself down. And we also learned to trust Amanda, our instructor, and she challenged us and helped us learn, but she didn't say that she knew everything, which was sort of a first for me. I remember her telling us about mistakes she'd made when teaching and what she'd learned from them. And she also told us that she hadn't done PAR before and didn't know what would happen. So anyway, at the start of the semester, when thinking about PAR, I didn't know how to be an activist or what that meant. I didn't know what to think about PAR at all. And we talked about being in a state of compassionate conservatism when you're analyzing the world around you, but not going beyond that. I was very used to being in that state. I was used to taking all this information in without taking action on it. And it took time for me to develop a critical consciousness of myself and my community. And I think that my classmates did help with that. And I know that they were also working on that. And it could be difficult to have some of these realizations, but I think that we felt that our understanding of the world and of ourselves was evolving as we went through this process. So as Katie mentioned, some of our classmates were more resistant to PAR than others. And I wouldn't say that I was resistant, but I was very unsure of myself and what we'd be doing, particularly at the start of the semester. Before we decided on a topic, I did not know what this would look like. So we had to work with those in our classroom who were resistant, and we did that by making a lot of decisions as a class and asking for everyone's input. And Taylor, did you want to say anything about your experience?
Yes, I was very resistant, and I remember we would do like little weekly diaries on how we were doing in the class, how we were feeling. I remember reading over my diaries, and it was just like, what are we doing? Like, how can we do this? I think we can. It was like just super resistant to the whole idea. And it's just funny, like reading that now, and like now I'm here, and I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, it's every student's like experience is so different, and I think that's just important to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that also brings me into my last point, which was how we had to deconstruct how we thought about change, because we went in thinking, what's the point of this if we're not going to like change the world and start this movement that everyone knows about? But we realized that we didn't have to change the world. We just had to change ourselves and our community. And I know that I've changed after doing PAR, and I know that a lot of my classmates have as well. Because before this, I hadn't done a project that changed how I looked at the world or at myself. And I know that having done PAR, that will affect how I teach and how I interact with my students. So that was everything I had for this slide. And then we had a couple of discussion questions. So think about your students and your classrooms. And we wanted to ask, what actions do you take to build a classroom community, and how can you do more of this? And also, how can you support your students who might be resistant? And we have a Padlet for this, so I can send the link.
Thanks, Autumn. So we just wanted to open up a space for discussion. Everybody is a panelist, so you can unmute yourselves, like I said before, and think about ways that you are currently building community in your classrooms, and ways you might be able to do more of that, right? And so we are opening up this sort of whole group discussion, since we don't have breakout rooms, up to oral reflections, and then you can reflect using the PowerPoint. Oh, sorry, not PowerPoint, the Padlet that Autumn sent you the link to, so you can add in a post here. So we just want to open up this space for you to reflect and share on your reflections. So we will leave the floor open for anybody who would like to share. Daily check-in, yeah. You can drop things into the chat as well if you have anything. Does the person who talked about community building here, would you like to share any additional information? Journaling about personal connections to topics. That's great.
Were you inviting me to share out loud? I'm that person.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to force you, but
no, it's cool. We're small. We're such a small group here. Might as well talk. I was just trying to, sometimes it's funny because I think once you get into community building and you value it, then it becomes part of everything. And so sometimes I'm like, what are the things I do? It's everything. Like, the more opportunities we have to be humans with each other and sharing stories, and I really model that. But daily check-in is so simple. It's like every day, how are you feeling? And I'm an ELA teacher, so we're building a feeling vocabulary as well, right? That's an ESL thing. Like, you can make it academic and interpersonal. And then when we're journaling to build prior knowledge about stuff, giving opportunities for students to share those experiences out. And you never know, like, so we were just reading The Outsiders. And so I asked students, would they rather join the Greasers or the Soch? And we had such passionate opinions, like often like, I will join neither gang. Gangs are bad for these reasons. But like, you have students sharing personal opinions that matter. And that's community building.
Cool. That's cool.
awesome.
Yeah. Oh, Amanda, there was a chat from Margaret. Do you want me to read that to you?
I have it here. How
Okay.
does community building in the classroom look different in the virtual classroom? Such a great question. And there's actually a lot of research that's done on intercultural communication competencies in what they call telecollaboration. And so there's actually a ton of research that shows that virtual communication, like what we're doing now because of the pandemic, It offers a lot of opportunities to engage with each other in multiple ways. Like, think about how we're doing this here. You can participate via the chat, you can participate in the Padlet, you can participate orally. I love this. Very nice. And so it offers multiple modalities in which you can engage with other people, right? And share experiences that might be more vastly different than prior communities, right? All right, I think we do want to move on to our next. We have two other little discussions as well, but we do want to move on. Let me get back into here. You will have access to our PowerPoint and everything. We'll share a link afterwards. So we have some tips built in here, but for time's sake, I think we'll pass it over to Taylor, who is going to kind of talk about the middle processes of doing PAR.
Yeah. So, hi again, my name is Taylor again. So I'm going to talk about like kind of the research and all the stuff that went into, I don't know, just kind of the process in a whole. So PAR is like a research project, but it's like a really unique process that we had to go to. And like Amanda and Katie and like Autumn kind of said, it's a cycle of just like, it's not very like linear, it's a cycle. So we're like constantly like researching and negotiating with yourself, with your peers, with the world, and like deciding and taking action. So another thing that I want to kind of emphasize is that this cyclical, sorry, this process is unique to pretty much every classroom, because in that classroom you really have this community of students, and the way that PAR is set up, each student has a really like a voice that matters, and especially because there's so much agency in the project. Like for example, if we would have had one less person in our classroom or one more person in the classroom, our project could have been completely different because each voice matters. And so I'll get a little bit more into that later. And then another thing I want to talk about is like we have these kind of steps on the slide, like you can see the bullet points, but like each one of those steps is going to be different depending on like what happens in your classroom, depending on what decisions your students make, because at each step of this process there is decisions made by the students. So even like when we first started, we read readings and video or watch videos that Amanda provided for us, and then like really kind of awakening us to this idea of action and seeing things wrong with the world. And then we moved on to brainstorming stuff that is important to us. And then after that stage, we like came together as small groups and brought our ideas on what we thought was important to these small groups. And why that is important, I guess, in the beginning is because like you're in these small groups and deciding within your small groups what's important or not important, but just like what you want to focus on and like be passionate about. And like I know I'm rambling a little bit, but each student is important because even in those small groups, like if one person decides they want to focus, for example, on the groceries for the availability of grocery for university students, if they like was more passionate about that, or I don't know, their voice, we could have like gone that route. Anyways, yeah. So I just want to like emphasize that each process is different. So like we got in small groups, we decided in the small groups, and then we went as a bigger classroom and decided what we were going to do, and that can all be different depending on your classroom. And then I guess I want to talk about why this is so important. This agency is important because it helps you, like makes you flip a switch, kind of. It helps you develop like an ethic of care and motivation. It's like this realization of, oh, like this isn't reproduction anymore. Like this is like the students are creating the knowledge and creating like this passion, and it like this agency helps remove the focus from like, oh, what can I do to like so that Amanda can give me a good grade. Like it just completely removes that, and just like makes you invest in your relationship with yourself and with your peers, with your community, and your relationship with the world. Like all my classmates have been talking about. Yeah, and without PAR, I don't know if I ever would have like given myself that agency to ever like do work on that relationship with myself and the world. So it's really special. And yeah. Sorry, a little passionate about it. We can go on to the next slide if you want. And then these are just like quotes from a vignette that I wrote. Like we wrote about our experience, and you can read them if you want. But basically, it's just talking about how PAR taught me to investigate myself, my community, and the world by choosing not to ignore the things in our community that maybe were wrong, or not wrong, but like problematic. But it actually like allowed us to dive right in and become involved in the world that we live in. Before, it kind of felt like, how Amanda was saying, it was almost like a bubble, like the classroom was a bubble, almost like it wasn't real life. I know that sounds weird, but and then it just kind of like popped that bubble, I guess. And I had such a different mindset. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I had such a different mindset before this class, before this education. I was learning, but I was never really changing. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, PAR forced me to look deeper into myself, at my identity, and like my position in the world, like Autumn said. Yeah, I learned a lot. Anyways, we have a discussion question. I probably went over time. Okay, no, I'm good. Okay. So I'll just drop, oh yeah, I'll drop the what's it called? Padlet. It's my first time using Padlet. So I'll just.
So the question here is, we want to hear from you about your current practices in your classrooms that are supporting your students' identities and communities, and really opening spaces for your students to build knowledge from within their communities, sort of this bottom-up approach to knowledge creation and dissemination. So same with our last process. You can share out orally, you can share in the chat, or you can share in our Padlet that Taylor sent.
Can I share orally? This is a little
Yeah.
long.
Yes.
Thank you so much. This is really great, you guys, hearing about this research. So I'm a teacher in Mansfield Schools. I teach 1st through 5th grade. I'm the only EL teacher there. We have a small population. And our PLC decided to do a goal around student connectedness. We created a survey. I gave it to all of my kiddos. One of the questions was, do you find books with characters that, look like you, that are like you? And the majority of students said no. So I was like, okay, well, that's pretty alarming, and we need to do something about it. So I'm on cycle to be observed this year and to, make a professional goal for myself. So I decided to do an action research at my school around this, and getting more books, getting students more books with characters that look like them, and hopefully like kind of starting with me, and their families, and like digging into it, and then sharing with our own community, and then hopefully sharing out into their classrooms, and then getting the librarian involved. So that's kind of my idea. So I think you guys are just kind of getting me excited about that, and I want to just be able to help my students.
That's
Thanks.
awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Makes me so happy.
Yeah. Other cheers on the Padlets.
Sorry, I messed up on that. Accidentally sent it to just Margaret instead of the whole.
Oh yes, I
But-
do that all the time. Well, that's Margaret. You get the.
I can share briefly. If you just heard me present, I said this, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's a really great practice. Interviewing family members about a topic. Like our students literally are in their homes right now. So if there's a theme related to your unit of study, which hopefully you have an essential question, right? Just grab it, have the students ask for perspectives of elders in their homes and have that multi-perspective conversation then come together. It can be a quick prior knowledge thing, it can be along the way, it can be a summative project, but I just think that is such an easy and like meaningful way.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier. I'm like, we're literally sitting in our communities, right? Like physically in communities. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to also, that made me think, I feel like those projects or interviewing family members can also have like an impact for generations into the future, because just recently my aunt sent me something she wrote after interviewing my great or great great grandmother. So it was really cool for me to also get that experience of like learning about my ancestors and their communities and their experiences.
And Carla, I saw you had unmuted yourself. Did you want to share out?
Sure. Yeah, just I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your experience with this, and especially how unwieldy and maybe it can feel messy and there can be some resistance, but right, but the importance of kind of engaging with that and pushing through. It's got me thinking about a project we do in our spring semester class that has really it's literature circles and allowing a lot of student choice, and then presentations and sharing, but we never really get to the doing anything part about it. And that's where I see PAR coming in. So it's really got my mind spinning, and I'll probably follow up with you, Amanda.
Awesome.
Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Carla. All right, I think we do want to move on so we can get to the last point to round out everything. As with before, we have, oops, sorry, I got too many things going on my screen. As with before, we also have some tips that will be in the PowerPoint that you'll have access to. But Katie's gonna take it home and talk about taking action.
Right. So sort of as we began to close in towards the end of the semester, I think the impact of this project really began to dawn on me. Not only did I feel changed as a future educator, but I felt as though I had changed as a student and a member of society. And I know that my impact hadn't ended the school to prison pipeline, but it had disrupted it for all of my future students. And I knew that me and my classmates had made a difference. Something that I really want to emphasize is that there is such a deep empowerment in actionable change. I've done countless research projects leading up to this. I mean, we all have, but regurgitating information in a paper does nothing to make a difference in the real issues that are actually prevalent in our society. And this project gave us this opportunity to see ourselves as agents of change in a world that is full of systemic issues similar to the school to prison pipeline. I personally had never seen myself as someone who could make change on big things. I thought that all of my change was going to be in my classroom for my students. But PAR kind of gave me this opportunity to see that even doing that is disrupting and dismantling systems that commit acts of violence toward our students. And if I had never done PAR, I don't know if I would have reached that conclusion. We had built obviously strong relationships with ourselves and with our peers, but as we mentioned before earlier, we had built a new strong relationship with the world. And we weren't these passive observers who were stuck in the realm of compassionate conservatism. We were activists, which is a really amazing feeling. So I'm going to take a moment to share some of our final products, which we collected for you all to view. So Amanda is going to pull those up. So this is our resource guide that we created for teachers. And so it includes a bunch of really cool things, including like some statistics. But another big thing that's really important is that so here are some of the statistics. And if you keep scrolling through the document, there's examples of what schools can do to help. So it actually is tangible. And it's not just, oh, the school to prison pipeline is a problem. It's what can you do about this problem in your classroom? And what can schools do to disrupt this for their students? And a little further down, here's some more resources, some amazing things that teachers can use. And finally, kind of bringing us back to the very first thing that we did is we practiced a mindfulness activity with you all. Mindfulness is a huge, huge part of disrupting the school to prison pipeline. And we saw it as something that could be really, really useful in helping your students in schools that police their bodies. So yeah, that's our resource guide. We also had a social media group. So here's their mission statement. And they're just basically saying it's a major issue in our community and it has to end. And so we hope to change our community for the benefit of our students. And it's a systemic issue, of course, but small changes as educators can make can disrupt the system as a whole. And the social media group also made like infographics that they put up on the Instagram. And it was I wasn't a part of this group, but I thought it was a really awesome way to just kind of get the information across quickly, succinctly, and like in a really visually engaging way. Because I think sometimes there's a bit of, when you're talking about issues like this, there's almost like a gate in the way when it's all just readings, right? So having this visually engaging way to show, I thought was really wonderful. So yeah, those are some of the products that we created that we're really, really proud of. And for us, the project didn't end with just these products. So our next steps started to kind of fall into place as we started this workshop presentation, and we're kind of getting the skeleton of a book chapter forming, which we're also really excited about. But the reason that's so important is we all knew that we wanted to kind of make the most out of this experience and carry on past the confines of the semester. We talked about this concept that education doesn't stop at the classroom walls. And we wanted to continue our growth and continue with this experience that was unlike anything any of us have had before. You know, it disrupted the status quo of typical classes and projects that we were so used to. And it became something entirely different. We weren't participating for the comfort of a good grade. We were actually participating through the discomfort of enacting change. And I think that that made a huge impact on us and our learning and our growing. And I think we will be forever changed by this project.
I'm not getting emotional, Katie.
So I'm going to drop the Padlet link in the chat for you all.
I think actually we'll just open it up for oral contributions, because we do want to leave some time for y'all to ask any questions of us. So if anybody would really like to kind of take or share out sort of currently how your curriculum is empowering your students to be agents of change and help them build sort of these more nuanced relationships with the world. So we'll open it up for oral sharing, if you will. or if that's not, if your curriculum is not setting your students up for that.
Well, I already shared about mine, but this was question statement was more about your work. Like, I almost wonder how your work um, is it right now within our COVID world. When we were in the building last week, we're going to be distanced after break, after Thanksgiving, but when we were in the building with so little students in the building and small groups, our behaviors and referrals were at an all-time low. And that was true across the whole district. So I wonder if that's true in our district. Is it true in other districts? And I wonder if this prison to pipeline break is almost like can have more of an impact now at this time, when students can you get more attention, more individual attention.
Anybody want to respond? Their thoughts?
I don't know necessarily that I have like a specific answer for you, but I love that you shared that. And I think that's something that I haven't thought about before. But I mean, um, yeah, it's wonderful that you bring that up. And I think that that's going to be a great reflection piece for me personally, because like I said, like I'm still thinking about the pipeline all the time because, it's going to be impacting my future students. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think there's also, especially, with everything that has happened over the last few months here in the Twin Cities since George Floyd's death, and the defunding of police, and the withdrawal of contractual obligations between school systems and the police departments. I think that is an area also rife for considerations of disrupting that pipeline, right? Because there are elements of individual behavior, but then there are elements of the fact that this is a system, right? And so individual referrals, in terms of the behavioral side of thing, is one aspect of that. And I think it's definitely a space for us to reflect on, for sure, Victoria. Thank you for asking and sharing that, right? I think let me move to our last slide here, but still, again, you'll have the tips and tricks. So these are some of the lingering questions we're having, right, about the potential for PAR, in thinking about how classrooms are reinforcing systems of oppression, thinking about how our classroom practices are supporting the ways that multilingual and multicultural identities are explored, and really how we're fostering relationships with our students that go beyond sort of that hierarchy, teacher student and expert novice. So we do want to open up. We have about 5 minutes left. If you have any other questions or comments and shares or uncertainties, if you will. While you do that, I'm going to drop into the chat a link to all panelists and attendees, right? A link to a Google Drive that we have set up that has a variety of resources related to participatory action research. It also has our slide deck here, so you'll be able to see the other tips. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, we'll leave that open for you.
I have one question. I know that at least Katie is an elementary ed major, right? I'm wondering if at any point towards the end of your semester, you had a chance to talk about how to engage kids, especially young children, in PAR. So more of that youth participatory action research. So taking it then to the next level, right?
So we didn't personally talk about YPAR, just because the course is situated within like the adults education realm. But I'm not sure, Katie, have you thought about YPAR with your wee ones?
Yes, I've thought about this plenty. So I think the first step to that is recognizing that students of any ages can be agents of change. And I also think that it's important to recognize that students are capable of understanding than a lot more than I think a lot of times we give them credit for. Um, so obviously with like younger grades, like if I were to end up in a kindergarten classroom, it would take a lot of scaffolding and you would need to be prepared to um, really, Amanda was a facilitator for a lot of this. And I think stepping into that role of perhaps you might need to do a little more assistance getting them through the process and understanding what they need to do than Amanda had with us as college students. But I think kids are so passionate about plenty of things in their communities. And I think it's a great way for them to learn about their communities and to see themselves as people who can make a difference in the world. Because I think also kids tend to internalize some of that. Oh, I'm a kid, what can I do? But there's so much they can do. They could do a food drive. They could do they could go clean up in their park or something. There's so much that kids can do. So I think you might have to adjust the scale a little bit of what you're doing, but I think it can easily be scaffolded for younger students.
Yeah, and I'll follow up to that too. The nice thing with PAR and YPAR, and YPAR is the Youth Participatory Action Research, is that it's not a strict method, right? It's a way of, examining the world and changing how we're thinking about this. And so there's a lot of flexibility that can be done. And I think, honestly, if I were to do YPAR at an elementary level, I think I would be very excited for the sheer enthusiasm that elementary ed students bring, right? When I'm, working with my pre-service teachers, there's resistance, right? They're so well ingrained, like socialized ideas of what education should look like. And there's questions that arise because of that. But when you get into, the younger kids, and maybe this is where, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but my experience is that you have way less resistance to creative ways of seeing the world, right? I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is currently 1:30, which is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, I think we can all drop our emails into the chat. But again, if you look at the resource, the shared drive that we sent, you'll have access to the PowerPoint, and the final slide in the PowerPoint has our email addresses associated with that as well. So if you have anything, please reach out. Thank you to my amazing colleagues now and community members. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your MELED experience.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.